Great, so welcome. Got a lot of fun updates and a great speaker today. Give you context for why we invited Renee to come to talk to us. You probably saw an email from me about the Fairfax County zero waste plan and kind of all the things the county is doing that they want public feedback on. There's also a lot of work and great advocates in the community in Northern Virginia that are holding our county accountable, pushing for policies that make sense, that protect the environment, that also support the other transportation and environmental and climate goals that the county has, including Renee and Nature Forward. So we met Renee in the Virginia Conservation Network meetings last year. She was pushing policy through the General Assembly. Winnie and I met with her last winter and wanted to invite her back to kind of share her experiences pushing for change that impacted the environment and really local communities. And then what else she's seeing on the horizon in Northern Virginia, and then kind of talk through what communities can learn from what they've experienced, what we can do. And so this will be kind of a mix of Renee presenting, but then also some Q&A and discussion within the committee of what could we do within Great Falls to help some of these topics within Fairfax County. So thank you. I'll pass it to you, Renee.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody for being here. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Renee Grebe. I'm with Nature Forward. We, back in the day, a couple years ago, used to be Audubon Naturalist Society, and now we are Nature Forward, and we connect people with nature through outdoor experiences, and we help to build a new population of advocates to do exactly what we're talking about today. So I want to quickly introduce myself and what my role is. So I am the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate for Nature Forward. We are headquartered up in Chevy Chase, Maryland. If anybody dare cross the bridge and see all the tree destruction that way, you will get to our Wood End Sanctuary. It's a beautiful place. We do advocacy in the DMV area. So we have a Maryland advocate as well as a DC advocate. And what I do in my job is a combination of community engagement, grassroots organizing, and direct advocacy for stronger environmental policies to help people and nature. Outside of Nature Forward, in my personal time, I also did the Master Naturalist through the Armin chapter, the Arlington Regional Master Naturalists, and I have served on Fairfax County's Environmental Quality Advisory Council since 2016. We advise the Board of Supervisors on environmental issues, and I write the Parks and Ecological Resources chapter of the annual report. And as you can see in my picture here, I have a love affair with caterpillars of all kinds, especially those that feed on Virginia creeper, which is my favorite native plant because of the awesome caterpillars they have. That's a little bit about me. What we'll cover tonight, I'm going to go through this pretty fast. So if you feel like it's coming at you too fast, just take a deep breath and listen to the story. But we'll talk quickly about affecting change, our experience, my experience doing the 2024 General Assembly push for HOA conservation landscaping, a bill at the state level. We'll talk a little bit about data centers and then just a really quick wrap up of some other issues that could be on your radar. It's definitely not a comprehensive list. I'll defer to Lisa and Winnie about if we do Q&As after each section, but we can also just hold your questions to the end if that doesn't work out. The first thing I wanted to do was, and you can use the chat box for this, I want to just know very quickly about all of you in the room, kind of where do you fall on the continuum of this scale of kind of 1, not at all, to absolutely number 5. Do you know how to change governmental policies? Have you done it before? 5 is like, you've already been involved and you've done it. And 1 is like, not only have you never done it, but you have no idea how you would do it. Just drop your number in the chat box, and then I'll be able to see that as I continue on, so I can kind of speak to that level of advocacy. And I'll tell you that my personal story of advocacy, even though I do this now in my job, the very first time someone ever told me, Renee, you need to go testify at a Board of Supervisors public hearing. I said, no way. I have no idea how to do that. I remember being terrified. I remember very viscerally the reaction I had. And so I was probably in a 1 area where I see a lot of you are 2s. But I'm here to say that you can do it. And it's really empowering to kind of tackle how to do that. So we'll dive into that now. So when we think about affecting change, there's lots of different ways to do it. I'm going to go through pretty fast, but this is just some context setting. So you can affect change by educating the public. And this can be done in a lot of ways, doing like site visits or tangible real world experiences where you get people out in nature or as a place where development might be happening. You can meet with decision makers. And again, this could be done in person for a more material connection to a certain place, or it might be if you're talking general policy, then maybe an office visit or a virtual meeting can be just as effective. And a side note here is that you can meet with staffers. You don't have to meet with the decision makers themselves, like their legislative aides or their chief of staff. That is just as effective to build those relationships with those people. So never feel like you're getting less if you meet with one of those people. You can attend a protest. There's always power in numbers, or you can give in-person testimony where there's also power in numbers. And we can also affect change at different legislative levels. Policy at the federal level, we all know about that. Policy at the state level and policy at the local level. And depending on what state you live in, it actually is custom because each state has a different set of rules that you have to abide by. And so even though we're talking about Fairfax County and Virginia today, it's helpful to set the context that Virginia is a Dillon rule state. If you've never heard that term before, it's critical. It means that localities can't do anything unless they get permission to do it from the state. So if you want to do a plastic bag ban, we have a plastic bag tax, but if we want to do a plastic bag ban in Fairfax County, we cannot do that until the state passes a law saying that we can do it. And then once they pass that law saying we can do it, then Fairfax County has to pass a law saying they will do it. So it's always this two-step process, and it's challenging. In Washington, D.C., it's a whole different can of worms over there because they have kind of a weird federal integration with their government system. And then we have Maryland, which does a combination home rule and Dillon rule state. They have in some of the bigger jurisdictions like Montgomery County, when you hit a certain population, you can be home rule. And home rule means you can make up your own rules. So you wouldn't need to ask for authority from the state to do that. So in the jurisdictions where we work in Maryland, it's essentially a home rule state. So we have that kind of Dillon rule state over our heads. But if you think about advocating locally, you also need to know what district you're in. And you guys are in Drainesville district here with Supervisor Bierman, but each of us live in a certain jurisdiction. So we, knowing who you report back to as your decision maker, as your constituent, that you want to know. I'm in Franconia district, Franconia district with Supervisor Lusk, so that's where I live down there. But these are the decision makers. We have planning commissioners who are advisory to the board as well. And so advocating at that level is very helpful because that's kind of the first step that happens before a lot of decisions go to the Board of Supervisors. And then who can advocate for what? Great Falls Civic Association is a 501c4, and that's different from us. We're a 501c3, but what we both can do is educate and engage the public. We can meet with decision makers, do grassroots lobbying, all this kind of stuff. I need to register as a lobbyist if I spend a certain amount of time over getting paid to do this work. As a volunteer, you don't need to register as a lobbyist, but it's just a interesting side note. But as a 501c3, we cannot endorse specific candidates and we can't be partisan in any way, whereas 501c4s are allowed to do that. So organizations like the Sierra Club are 501c4s as well and can endorse candidates. So I'm going to dive quickly into our General Assembly experience, what we have done in the past and what we did in 2024 and how that differs. If you think about advocating to the General Assembly at the state level, you might have a look like this kid does. That was my look when I thought about advocating at the state level. I think even in my paid role in Nature Forward, it took me several years to understand what was going on at the state level. And we're really lucky because we're a partner with the Virginia Conservation Network, and that's really great. When we think about state level advocacy at Nature Forward, we let our big partner organizations take the lead and we play a support role. We're a regional organization. We're focused on the DMV, and my role specifically focusing on Northern Virginia and really even more specifically really on Fairfax County. I do a little bit in Loudoun and Prince William as needed in other jurisdictions sometimes. But we don't typically invest at the state level or have the connections of that network of decision makers needed to lead state advocacy. We've chosen specifically to be locally focused. So VCN is our primary partner in this regard. They're a network of over 160 network partners. We're one of them. And they're committed to building a powerful and diverse, highly coordinated conservation movement focused on protecting our Commonwealth's natural resources. And so they focus on four main categories: clean water, land conservation, land use and transportation, and clean energy. And so they're, pulling this power of 160 organizations, all of who have specialties, and it's really fantastic. They help us know what is a good bill, what is a bad bill, and we defer to the bill tracker here. This gets updated every year. A side note is that another 501c4 is the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. So they also have a bill tracking their URL changes per year, but you can go see what they're supporting as well. So it was pretty big news when Nature Forward made the decision to help advocate for a bill that would help homeowners, ensure that homeowners who live in HOAs would be allowed to manage their property in an ecologically friendlier way than like requiring turf grass, which a lot of HOAs do. And that would be, an option to be able to do that. So, I didn't know what this meant to do this, and that's fine. This was my first this was my first introduction to state level advocacy of pushing a bill. So I'm just going to give you a quick history of kind of how this came about and how we ended up saying yes to this, because this was really outside of our purview. So in 2020, this low impact landscaping bill was introduced into Maryland's General Assembly, and it didn't go far the first year, but the next year in 2021, it went all the way to the governor's desk and it got signed. And whenever a state next door does something, it's always exciting. Maryland's a very different state than Virginia. We learned that through this process. So you can't really just say, look, Maryland did it. Virginia doesn't really like that very much. But we still got inspired by that. And so it inspired lots of different people. Melinda Soltis is a Fairfax County resident who she posted in February of 2020 on the Virginia Native Plant Society. And someone said, hey, Renee, did you see this Facebook post? And Melinda ended up actually emailing Nature Forward separately. So these emails started flying back and forth. So Kathy Ledeck, if anybody knows her, she's since moved out of the county, but she's just a fantastic advocate in the area. She was the first one to tell me to go testify at the government center. So we both have worked on HOA issues, and I've advocated in my own HOA for conservation issues. So she knew I was passionate about this, and she said, I think this sounds like an interesting idea. So I reached out to Ann Jersick from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, who also leads this kind of work. And so we got the four of us connected via email. But it was pretty bad timing because February is right in the middle of General Assembly. You can't really do much in the middle of General Assembly. It's already going. So Ann Jersick, who knows the process, said, let's regroup. Let's regroup in April when the General Assembly is done. Melinda was on it. April came around. She was watching that calendar. She saw it had wrapped up. She emailed all of us. She said, let's I did some homework. Let's talk about what I've done. And Ann Jersick said, great. Let's talk about some strategic next steps. What I think you can do. We need to figure out a patron for this kind of bill. Who's that going to be? We need to know why this is a statewide problem. We know what your issue is in your HOA, but why do all Virginians need this? And then how do we make it a broader issue? Maybe connect this to water quality. That's a topic that's dear to our heart and Nature Forward, and definitely near and dear to Chesapeake Bay Foundation. How can we maybe tie it to nutrient reductions of nitrogen and phosphorus, which is something we need to adhere to via law? What if we saw a 10% reduction in turf? What would that do to have conservation landscaping? We gave that homework to Melinda and said, all right, report back. We didn't hear from her for a while. So just fast forward to 2023. She's on it again. Next February, she reaches out and she said, I have done a lot. And what she is doing is clearly impressive work. She's spoken to her delegates. She's beginning the process of starting a Wild Ones chapter to be able to advocate for this even more effectively, to be able to build her own network. So it was really great to see like her slides that she had done. And but again, it's February, right? So we just can't do this. We're in the middle of General Assembly. We can't do it. But the nice thing was that later that February, there was talk with Douglas Ptolemy, if you know him, our favorite entomologist who talks about bringing nature home. Melinda was at that, talking about her new Wild Ones chapter. So I got to meet her, which was great. I didn't get a selfie with her because I was too busy getting a picture with Ptolemy, but I wish I had a picture with Melinda. I didn't have the foresight to think about that. So we said, okay, let's pause it. Let's get into the end of General Assembly, meet up again. So March, she meets up with us again, and she tells us even more things that she's done. She's shared more slide presentations with more legislators. She was interviewed on a podcast about this. She's drafted a survey to collect stories from across the state on this. She is flying. Fast forward to May, I reach out to Melinda for some next steps and say, hey, I think you've proven that you're a pretty awesome advocate. Nature Forward wants to support you in this. I think we're going to dip our toes into this and see where we go. Because she was really boosting our ability to do this by all the work that she was doing. We really appreciate that. We couldn't have done it without Melinda. And I know I've talked with her extensively. She often says she couldn't have done it without us. It was very mutual. So we set up time for lunch together in June, and we did it. We had just a wonderful lunch, and we just kept planning. So in June, I reached out to the Virginia Conservation Network and talked about getting a presentation to VCN with Melinda and I. And also we decided that, from a personal standpoint, we could present a legislative proposal to the Environmental Quality Advisory Council of Fairfax County, just so that they could think about this as a topic. So it was great because Melinda started drafting text then, which was really a kick in the butt to think about how do we put words to paper. We worked together in July on VCN's annual briefing book that we bring to legislators about the topics we're talking about. And we got this topic in there. And then I presented this bill to EQAC in my personal capacity as a legislative proposal. The first one went great for VCN, but EQAC said, no way, this will never fly. You cannot challenge the power of HOAs. And that was really our first eye-opening experience that an environmental group would really shrink back at this. And it was interesting because that's kind of what we thought might happen, but not from EQAC. So things just became a total blur. Things were flying. In the summer, we had draft legislation in hand. We reached out to the Community Associations Institute. That's the main lobbying organization for HOAs. You have to know who's going to be at the table in General Assembly, right? You got to do your research. We knew if we worked with them, we would have a stronger chance of getting a bill passed. We met with so many more additional legislators in search of a patron. We met with potential partners such as Barbara Ryan, who I believe you all work with as well. She's also with Virginia Native Plant Society. We worked with Plant Nova Natives to share our things out more broadly, like the survey. We spoke to advocates in Maryland to see what challenges they hit. We partnered with anyone we could. We did just blitzes via email, and I networked at Virginia Conservation Network's annual retreat. We were just on a big marketing campaign. Fall 2023, we had more meetings with partners, more meeting with legislators, lots of dead ends, but we just kept trying. And then we did a conservation cafe on this topic for Nature Forward, and we talked about it from a Maryland and Virginia perspective. And it was hosted by the humane gardener, Nancy Lawson, if you know her, she's fantastic. It was actually her sister who was the impetus for the Maryland bill. So she had a lot of firsthand knowledge about this. We sought to engage Community Associations Institute again, but they didn't have capacity, so they weren't able to work with us, unfortunately. We were successful, though, in vetting the language with an HOA lawyer, which was really helpful because she saw our Maryland language draft. She said, no way, look at this example and continue on. So then it's coming November. We met with even more partners. November. We met with Delegate Krizik the day after he was reelected. So you can imagine timing is everything. This poor guy, we thought he might be a good patron, but he was in the middle of an election campaign. So we really couldn't get his attention in that fall as we were doing things. But we did get him. And he said, yes. He said, I'll be your patron. That's fantastic. So if things were a blur before, they took off even more. That was a very quick story. So I wanted to just pause here and reflect on some things and maybe get other folks' thoughts very briefly, but sorry. So this is interesting, right? You think about advocacy at the General Assembly as happening at the General Assembly. but that's 60 days max. They have 45-day sessions and 60-day sessions. We spent about 2 years just laying the groundwork for this bill to get it into existence. A resident had an idea. She researched the heck out of it. She networked. She built relationships. She built power through partnerships. She was key in helping to find a patron because she had done so much groundwork, talking to a lot of Delegate Krizik's partners in the House. She learned the ropes, and I learned the ropes of what it meant to get a bill into introduction. We were going like 0 to 60, but it took 2 years to do that with varying acceleration points. And I would also say that this year's General Assembly was really an interesting one in terms of finding patrons and doing advocacy, because Virginia had just gone through a big redistricting. So every district was changed, and many residents got new representatives. I got a new senator, for example. But more challenging was that there was a 30% turnover. That is a huge percentage. So you had all of these new people who are their own doing their own networking among their own colleagues, trying to figure out where they're going to fit in. How are they going to build a name and position for themselves in the General Assembly? So it was really a challenging time. In terms of the political makeup of the legislature, both the House and the Senate, for the first time in several years, were controlled by Democrats, but only by a slim margin. And the governor, who has line item veto power over every bill, was and is Republican. So what does this mean from a lobbying standpoint, right? You want to get as many people supporting your bill. It doesn't matter what party you are. So you need to understand what are the politics happening behind the scenes so that you don't run into a stone wall, or so that you can be speaking the language of a certain legislator that will resonate with why your issue is important. That's not going to be the same for everybody. So you have to do a lot of research on the people you'll be talking to. And I guess one of the key takeaways, and I've heard this before, but it never really resonated for me, which is just set up meetings with your representatives and your senators, get to know them. If you ever want to do state advocacy, you want to know them, and they should know you, so that they trust you, they know your positions, and vice versa. So we'll do a little bit more on that later. Knowing what committee they sit on and such, where their power is. But meeting with them outside of session right now is a great thing. And it might just be a sit down to say, this is what my passions are. What are your passions? How do they overlap? As a constituent, your voice matters the most. When you talk to the person that you vote for or that you could vote for, that's very powerful to the person, the decision maker listening to you. So just know that's where your power lies. Do we want to stop there for any kind of quick comments, or do you want to keep blazing on?
I have a question, Renee, about something you talked about with EQUAC. That's the right
Yep, you got it.
acronym? So that's the process. So we've seen, or some of us have seen, like Fairfax County's legislative program, like where they say these are our priorities going to General Assembly. So the process would be to go to these advisory councils, and then they give their priorities. It sounds like, in your experience, like it's more effective to go to people who you vote for, or have you seen that work to advocate with these advisory councils for Fairfax County to get that backing for environmental policies?
Question. I mean, you can always give feedback to organizations like the Tree Commission or EQUAC or the Trails and Sidewalk Committee. You could also just go directly to your supervisor and say, I think this is an important thing for you to advocate for, and here's why. You can also talk to the head of the legislative committee. I think that's Supervisor Walkinshaw now. So you might not be a constituent of his, but he's the head of that committee. So that would still be a position of power. I think you could do any of those. Whenever you do direct advocacy, you're going to get your message through a lot clearer. So, that's a one thing to think of. Another thing I've learned with the Fairfax County legislative package is to stay vague. For EQUAC, we tried to put a very specific bill in, and it was like, that's way too specific. The legislative packet works best when you say things like, we want better tree conservation, because that way, regardless of what bill comes up in the General Assembly, if it falls under that bucket, if they had agreed to that in their legislative packet, then the supervisors will be able to lobby for that.
That's good advice. Does anyone else have a question on what she shared so far?
I see the comment in the chat says interested in any specific ask that was being raised in this initiative. For this one, it was just we wanted to have more we wanted to have more of a guarantee that HOA residents would be able to take actions, positive ecological actions. We had an example of a homeowner in Loudoun County who wanted to keep his 5-acre, 2-acre meadow on a 5-acre lot, and his HOA took him to court, told him he had to cut it. And after several years, and I think it was $90,000 of his own personal investment, he won the court case and got most of that repaid. I think he ended up paying $20,000 out of pocket for that. That's needless. If we had a law like this, he wouldn't have had to go to court and such. So that was the kind of specific ask, was to kind of defend the right of homeowners to do this. Let's keep blazing forward, and then keep your questions, write them down. 2024 happened. So what we just covered was just how we got to even getting the bill in, right? We had Krizik now. He said he'd write a bill. He's the patron. We're not. We're just supporting the patron. So once you get a patron, it's kind of out of your hands. You can give advice and you can influence, but it's out of your hands. So we did help write some draft language, again, with all that feedback that we had. We worked with his office and his legislative aide to get language that they understood. They get it run by their internal mechanisms as well. So, it's out there in the world. The text gets posted on the LIS system, which is Legislative Information Services, I think. So we've been cautioned that bills don't pass in their first year. That's highly unusual. And it's not unusual for a bill to take 3 or 4 years to pass. So it was hard to stay optimistic when you have that kind of expectation, but hey, you never know what can happen. So we were working with, we had tried to work with the Community Associations Institute. So we felt like at least we had done some due diligence there. But we also were cautioned that while Virginia is a very strong private property rights state, which you would think would be in favor of our bill, the powers of the HOA lobby are also very strong here. So we knew we had some interesting challenges. So once the bill was actually filed, it was great. The Community Associations Institute reached out to us and they wanted to work with us once they saw the bill was out there, because they probably didn't like the bill as we had written it. So they realized that we were serious and moving forward. So, but that's great. We wanted to work with them. So discussions in the fall as we drafted the language, could have been more productive, but hey, when opportunity knocks, you got to do it. So we did. We dove in. So on LIS, it lists the history of a bill. So January 8th, it got referred to the committee that was going to hear it for the first time. And I just thought of this, like, what goes on behind the scenes for each and every single bill is like this most complex dance that you just get dropped into from outer space, and everybody's dancing the same tune and you're like, I don't know how to do this. So you just try your best to kind of fit in and do it. We spent a long time waiting to find out when this bill was going to actually go on the floor, who would hear it. And the LIS system has a ton of information, and it's worth understanding its power to navigate it, because once you know it a little bit better, you start kind of knowing who you can advocate for. So I'll do a little bit of running through it, but I did see an announcement that said that they're going to be updating it this fall as well. So our bill was only introduced in the House. You can also introduce companion bills in the Senate, but we didn't have a Senate patron. So that weakens the chance that a bill will get passed, because you kind of have a double chance to get it vetted. So we knew it was going to go to general laws, and we clicked into general laws to see who was on it. Those are the delegates that are heading up the general laws committee. And so we found out that it was probably going to go to this housing and consumer protection group. So we clicked into that, and we found out that these were the people who needed to vote in favor of our bill in order to get it go to the next step, which would be to the general laws. So you dive down really deep and start in the deepest bowels of the decision makers and then work your way back up again. And so we knew that these were the people, but we didn't know when the meeting was going to be. So we know they happen on Thursdays, so you can kind of project out. It happens after another committee wraps up, so you have to go find that committee. It's very complex. But we did find out at the end of the month that it was going to go to that group. We thought it would. And that at that point, we had to just go fast. You can click into the agendas to find out when exactly. It was just announced that it was going to go to that group, but you don't actually know what agenda it will get added to. But we did find out that it was going to be added on February 1st. So at 10 p.m. on January 26th, I was emailing our advocates and our partners with a game plan. We had lined up 3 people to testify live at the public hearing. We were kind of updating them. Then on Saturday, I was texting the delegate and his legislative aide our updates and our meetings that we had with CAI over the past week. They were sending updates to us. The language of the bill was changing. It was totally different from what was on LIS. And we went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And we felt really proud of our progress. This is just one of the versions of the bill. You can just see how many line edits we were doing. And so fast forward, we're there for actually lobby day with BCN. That was the last day of January. And then we just stayed an extra day to be at our public hearing. We got there when the sun rose. We let our legislative aide know we were there. We attended another public hearing that I could testify in support of improved tree canopies. And then after that meeting got out, we heard from Delegate Krizik that the bill had changed in a very detrimental way with a very short 3-word change that completely undermined the bill. So we urged the patron that day, just a couple hours before the public hearing, to pull the bill. And we said, I think this needs more work. We can't let this go, because the only thing worse than a good bill not progressing further would be to have a good bill rewritten to do the opposite of the goal of the original bill. So after we discussed with Krizik, he suggested that we also ask for a housing committee work group for this bill. I didn't even know what that meant, but that was what was done. And so Melinda and I were both able to testify along with Jay Ford from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, so we could tell the importance of this story. And then after we talked about it, then Delegate Krizik kind of started off saying he wanted to have the bill to have more time. We had collectively 5 minutes to present, and then that was it for the day. And I'll just say that very quick part again. We had 5 minutes collectively to advocate for this bill. Maybe you're used to, if you've done budget hearings at all locally, having 3 minutes or 5 minutes total just for you. This was for as many people as wanted to testify, 5 minutes. So we had, 30 seconds sometimes. It was very fast. So you can look at bills on LIS and you can see what happened, but you really don't know what happened, right? There is so much. You can watch these hearings. You can see a little bit on the surface of what happens, but you don't know what's actually going on unless you're in there, which is what makes state advocacy so challenging. That's not to dissuade anybody, but it's just to say, focus on your legislators where you are a constituent, you can make a difference. That's the easiest thing to do. Melinda and I went and took our obligatory selfies in front of the Capitol building. We headed home. And then we came back in June to present to the Housing Commission to tell them about why the bill was important. And this is a work group meant to have our stakeholders come together to see what we can do for 2025 for this bill. So that's still a work in process. We're hoping to get the chance to reintroduce the bill with some language that might have consensus. Stay tuned. We don't know. Do you want to stop for questions, or do you want to dive quickly into data centers? Either one is fine by me.
Yeah, I just want to pause and say thank you for all your work. That's so much effort. I had no idea. And I think your overview has helped me and probably others in our committee to understand like where the best use of our energy and time will be, looking at our goals for the next year. But does anyone have any quick questions on the conservation and kind of generally getting things through the process before we talk about data centers? Because there's an action tomorrow, so we want to make sure we cover the data center topic as well.
I'm just curious, do you still have your same advocates as far as officials, elected officials?
We do.
Okay, that's good. They didn't go away too.
It did not go away. No, but every General Assembly brings new issues, and they have different focuses and different, we're trying to see, and this is still a work in process, so I progress, I don't know, but when can you make change? When's the right time, right? Do you ever do double Dutch jump rope where you kind of look and you wait for the time to jump in? You have to kind of know that, and your decision makers know that better than I do, for sure. So that's one of the considerations too you have to be thinking about.
Thank you.
Lisa? Can I offer a question? A suggestion? Renee, did you talk with Dave Bolivar?
We did.
Okay.
And he's the chair of the housing commission committee that we presented to as
Oh,
well.
he's the
So
chair. Great.
yeah, he's the chair. So we presented to him in June.
David at one time, before he became a senator or representative, whichever he is, I guess he's in the House, was on the Soil and Water Conservation District.
Yes.
And he routinely will sponsor legislation that has to do with nature, water. He's into this stuff. He understands it natively because I mean that's where he came from. So he's the kind of person that Soil Water Conservation District turned to every time. So.
Absolutely. We did reach out to him. He showed support for it, but was not willing to be a patron for it.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. I mean, because I think he's in high demand. So for a lot, legislators only have a certain amount of bills they can introduce each General Assembly. So you have to be, careful. Again, it's that double Dutch. When do I jump in? But he worked really closely with Delegate Krizik, which is great. And when Delegate Bolivar is telling Delegate Krizik, thumbs up, you're in a good shape. So
right.
Thank you for that suggestion. And knowing things like that, right? When Jerry can help tell it, you talk to other advocates to know who's the right person to reach out to. It's invaluable to network that way.
Right.
I'll say one thing: the Virginia League of Conservation Voters does a Friday noon session all during General Assembly, and I'll try to at least be able to direct you to their website because they have a sign up link for it. It is like grab your popcorn and watch a soap opera. It is great. It will tell you all of the innards of what's happening behind the scenes, and it's so eye-opening and fun. I have thought it was fun. So if you have free time, noon on Fridays during General Assembly, tune in. It's really, really fun.
Hey,
Let's dive into data.
So Julie, you have a quick question?
Yes, very quick. Could you remind us of your specific goal for this bill? I know you explained at the beginning, but what is
this bill would allow homeowners to do conservation landscaping and making sure that there were no unreasonable restrictions. So that was one of the things we were trying to define in this bill. We had said turf grass left unmowed was not managed conservation landscaping. We knew that mowed lawns were an important thing in HOAs. We didn't want to have people just let the lawn go and say, this is conservation. We wanted to have it be really planned. So we talked about, how it had to have, maintenance. That was an important component of this as well. How it had to prefer native plants, how it had to have the goal of ecological sustainability. So we tried to bake a lot of that in. But of course, those were a lot of the things we also talked about, right? I live in a little townhome. My yard's a tiny patch, but Melinda lives in a single family home with a big lawn. So how do you legislate, maybe you want a nice lawn edge as an HOA, you want to have the first third of your lawn be grass. Well, if you did that in my yard, it would look ridiculous because I only have a little tiny thumb patch, So we tried to talk through things like that as well with CAI of, how do you legislate kind of a not one size fits all, but enough flexibility to meet the goals of lots of different scenarios?
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right, Renee, let's talk about data centers.
All right, data centers. This is great. I want to say we are using data centers right now. Nature Forward is not against data centers. Everything I'm going to say from here on out is about common sense guardrails to make sure, really, that we have data centers in the future, that they're sustainable enough that we can sustain them in the long term. This is a topic that needs attention at all levels of government. The federal, we do federal lobbying once a year. We talked to folks there about data centers this past March. We talked to our legislators at a state level about it, and we've talked at the county level. Every single level has things they can do to help on this front. At the county level, tonight, if you haven't yet, your voice is needed for tomorrow's data center zoning ordinance amendment public hearing. Can't think of a more boring title, but it's really important despite how boring it is. So we're going to dive into some basics of data centers 101. I have a conservation cafe that Ann Bennett from the Sierra Club did for us. I can share that link with folks later, just so you can get educated. She does a fantastic presentation. She's let me borrow some of her slides for tonight. So I'll talk about data centers at a high level, and the ZOA, the Zoning Ordinance Amendment, as well. Northern Virginia has the world's highest concentration of data centers in one location. This is data from 2023, and it's ranked by power usage, megawatts. And this is because, unlike typical real estate, which is measured in like square footage, the more realistic measurement right now for energy is for energy capacity and consumption, and that's just megawatts. So this is because server density drives usage. If you can pack a lot of servers vertically or just more densely, your energy usage is going to go up kind of regardless of your square footage. So right now, Virginia, according to 2023, ranks in at 2.5 gigawatts. That's 2,500 megawatts. And the next biggest single market is Beijing at 1.7 gigawatts. So you can just see we are an enormous epicenter. So what does 2.5 gigawatts or 2,500 megawatts actually mean? Where does that power come from? These are just some comparisons that I pulled data from other sources. There's a new solar array being built at Dulles Airport over where there used to be hundreds of acres of forest. That 835 acres will produce 100 megawatts. We're looking for 2,500 megawatts. Coal can produce one coal power plant. This is an example down in Halifax County, can pull 866 megawatts. Again, these data centers are looking for 2,500. Nuclear power plant, the one at North Anna, it can produce 1,800, 1.8 gigawatts. And wind, there's a new offshore wind being built or has been permitted and will be being built. That entire wind farm could go 100% to the data centers we have just today, not including the ones being built. So you can see energy is a really eye-opening component of data centers. Why are data centers concentrated here in Northern Virginia? Tech sector in Loudoun County, like AOL, was born here. We have seedbed fiber optic cables that you can see on this cool map here. We have cheap power. The commercial rates are lower. We have lax state and local regulations. And there are state and policy subsidies over $1 billion in Virginia in terms of real estate and use exemption taxes for data centers. Do not look at this slide in detail. Just know that as of January 2024, in preparation for the zoning ordinance amendment, Fairfax County did a report on what has already been built and what is coming. This data is based in square footage, which we already talked about isn't really a great measurement, but it's all we have. Existing is 3.1 million square feet. What is coming is 4.3 million square feet. So this very small list compared to what is built today versus what is coming, they're getting into hyperscale data centers. They're getting to be huge ones. And we already know some of these that were proposed have already been approved now. So things are changing really rapidly. We're going to go from about 54 football fields of data centers to about up to 129 for the data centers that were logged in that report. And we think that report undercounted them. What are the impacts? Energy needs. We're going to need so much power, and Dominion is relying on carbon-based fuels to satisfy that need. The power infrastructure, you need power lines to bring that power in. You need substations. Substations are exempt from being built in a resource protection area by streams. So our protected areas are at risk. Backup diesel generators, they're regulated at the state level. They cause noise and pollution, and they're often placed or can be placed next to homes. There was one just passed by right in July where the backup diesel generators will be placed 50 feet away from a mobile home community. It's terrible. Evaporative cooling is one way and the most common, most efficient way to cool down data centers, which generate a massive amount of heat. But that evaporative cooling draws water from our supplies. We know from an example in Louisa County that they were permitted to withdraw 620,000 gallons per day at full build out. Noise and lighting, that's true of most developments. That's not necessarily unique, except for that the diesel generators and the HVACs can be noisier than a typical development. And the health impacts overall for particularly the most vulnerable. So ultimately, what we're asking for in this zoning ordinance amendment is that we want data centers to be built using the highest standards possible to ensure that we have a sustainable future. Like I said, we are not against data centers. We want common sense guardrails to ensure that they're good neighbors. What do they look like? These are two examples, courtesy of Sierra Clubs and Bennett of data centers, and also from our neighbors over at PEC. So what is the zoning ordinance and what can it do and what it can't do? It can address land uses and zoning, what the building looks like. One of the things they're proposing is to put fake windows on the buildings to make them look better. That is a nice goal, but it also kind of ignores the elephant in the room, which is the massive energy needs. By the way, they're also not making them bird safe windows because that's a broader policy they couldn't integrate into this. So now we're making fake windows to kill birds that we don't on a building we don't even need windows on. It's interesting. We're also asking for distances from the metro so that we're not building essentially data center warehouses in a place where we really want the most activated spaces for people to live and shop and work. What the zoning ordinance can't address is noise. That's regulated by a separate noise ordinance. They can try to do studies about noise. They just can't regulate it. They can try to ask for enclosures to minimize it, but they just can't regulate it. Generators, that's regulated by the state, and substations and their resource protection impacts, that's regulated by the state as well. Most importantly, the zoning ordinance amendment can define if something can be built by right or by special exception. If you don't know these terms, they're really important to know. By right goes through an administrative approval. It has to just meet minimum standards. It's what they put into the law. What is in the law has to be met. There's no public process. Special exceptions opens the door for some of that community engagement, negotiations, and improvements for site-specific impacts that might be happening. And the ZOA is important because it's law. Our comprehensive plan, which could also apply to special exceptions, that's great, but they don't apply to by right development. That guidance is really helpful, but it's missing. It's missing. The by right development must only abide by the ordinance. So that's an important distinction. So the timeline for what has been happening with the zoning ordinance amendment, there was a planning commission public hearing held in June. Then the Board of Supervisors held a public hearing in July and was going to make a decision on that public hearing in later in that month. But they realized on July 30th that they had not had the proper public notice based on a new law passed in the General Assembly just this year. And that meant all of those were null and void and they have to redo them. That redo is tomorrow night. So tonight is the night to write your public comments on this. It's very, very quick, but they may or may not be read. You could also sign up to testify. I've heard that there's over 40 people signed up. We had over 60 for the July 16th meeting, but you can get a phone call and just voice your concerns that you want the strongest regulations. That's all you would need to say, really. But having your voice there is really, really powerful if you're willing to do that. So think about that. The things that we're asking for are to have all data centers approved only by special exception, none by right. We also are asking that all data center applications that are in process, but not yet approved, be required to adhere to this new language. And then we're also asking for a commitment to quickly take up additional environmental policies for data centers. If they're going to only do not do the special exception, then two things that they could put in the ordinance would be to make sure that they require a special exception within a mile to the metro, and also require a special exception if they want to put their noisy polluting equipment closer than 500 feet. Right now, those two things, we would love to have special exceptions if everything can't be a special exception. We've got a blog post that has all this information on it, so you don't have to memorize it. We have talking points. You can email your supervisor, Bierman, tonight, or you can do it through our blog that will email it to Jill Cooper, the clerk of the board, Chairman McKay, and Bierman, your supervisor. I'll drop that link in the chat box at the end. And then just at a state level, as we think about advocacy outside of Fairfax County, multiple bills were introduced in 2023 and 2024 with ways that the data center industry could be regulated, such as transparency in reporting on what their energy and water usage is. You can't get that today until they're already built. Siting of data centers away from important places like residences, schools, national parks. Looking at modifying current tax exemptions that are being given away to data centers, or shifting costs for energy demand away from residential customers. Every single bill was passed over, was skipped in these past 2 years. The General Assembly did say this year for 2024, every single data center bill that was introduced was to be studied. So this study, was requested of the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, JLARC. And so staff has been assigned to review the overall impacts of data center industry in Virginia and state and local policies regarding the industry across the topics we just talked about and more. And the report is due out at the end of this year. So this is going to be important because that will influence advocacy in this coming General Assembly 2025. This is the most important issue in Virginia. HOA conservation landscaping is wonderful. That pales into comparison to what data center impacts are going to be environmentally. It will affect all of us in terms of our climate change goals, in terms of potentially direct impacts to residents, as we're seeing in too many communities. I can pause there, and I have probably about 5 more minutes of other issues on our radar, including Park Authority budget, which might be of interest, because there's another public hearing on Wednesday for that. Are there any questions about data centers? Let's dive into the last little bit then. So the issues for your radar, these are just 4. There are more for sure. The first one's Fairfax County budget. We also have, relatedly, potentially, Public Recreation Facilities Authority, which is just something to keep on your radar. The big policy plan update, which is talking about our comprehensive plan language, and then just generally preparing for what's coming up in 2025 for the General Assembly. So for the Fairfax County budget, this is typically something we think about more in the early spring when the Board of Supervisors is thinking about budget time. But right now, for the Park Authority Board, this is the time they're looking at their budget. They're having a budget committee meeting this Wednesday, so 2 days from now. That's going to be at 5:45 p.m. I believe you can join via Zoom as well. But they're taking comments right now, and I can drop a link in the chat box as soon as I stop sharing my screen about the kind of cuts that they're proposing in order to meet the county executive's direction to make proposals that have 10% cuts for every department. The Park Authority already is really struggling financially. We've been advocating for the past 3 years for additional funding, and we've been making really good progress. These 10% cuts would undermine so much of what we asked for. One of the things that might be relevant to you guys in Drainesville is that they're proposing closing Scotts Run parking areas to save money. This is just one of many things, like undercutting the ability to address high-risk trees, cutting the summer concert series shows, reducing maintenance of sports facilities, reducing maintenance of picnic areas, dog parks, playgrounds. That's just to name a few. So I'll drop that information in the chat box. Next up is this Public Recreation Facilities Authority. This came up in June as a proposal, and a Public Recreation Facilities Authority could focus on the entertainment, sports, and other recreational needs, and they'd have the authority to build new facilities, facilitate partnerships with neighboring jurisdictions, local institutions, and foster economic diversification. They'd be able to acquire and lease properties, collect fees, construct, operate, maintain projects. You think about kind of how the Park Authority operates, it would be kind of a similar structure with a different kind of board. So the staff has been directed to conduct a review and study of the establishment of a Recreational Facilities Authority, and they're going to report back to the Board of Supervisors at a committee meeting. We don't know which one, likely at the end of this year or early 2025. This is on our radar because we see a lot of overlap with what the Park Authority does. And we're quite concerned that given the drastic budget cuts of the Park Authority and its inability to even manage the natural resources that it has, and making sure equitable access to all of their recreational facilities occurs, we're a little bit nervous about how this might impact that. Will we lose parkland for this? We don't know. We have no idea. We do have a lot of questions, and we're hoping that we'll get those answered when the reporting comes out. Fairfax County's policy plan update, it's called Plan Forward. This is probably the most boring thing anyone will talk to you about, but it's super important. So you don't get bored by it. Just know that this policy plan hasn't been updated in forever. And this update is going to be great because things like even climate change is absent from our policy plan today. So these are the first few chapters that are getting updated in this first round. Environment's obviously an important one, Parks and Rec for this group as well, but maybe something else on this list also it piques your interest. And then want to also address two new topics, which would be equity and community health, which obviously has a lot of overlap and everything above as well. And I'll drop a link for that as well in the chat box, or I'll share it with Lisa and Winifred. That's going to be a little bit later on. You don't have, that's not a tomorrow kind of thing. And then just as we think about preparing for the General Assembly, find out who your legislator is. If you don't know, that link will tell you. And then, you know, like I said, data centers is really the #1 issue that Nature Forward is focused on, just because the impacts are so huge and we really need action now to get ahead of the kind of wild west of where we are. You don't need to be an expert on data centers to talk about it. I'll drop in the link to the Conservation Cafe that you can, you know, get a high level more than you got today from Ann Bennett. And all you really need to do is speak from your heart and think of this as an opportunity to build relationships. You can talk with your legislators about something besides data centers as well. But it's a great opportunity to just say, I'm thinking about this topic. I'm watching you in the kindest way possible, of course. So that's what I have for you today. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer because I know that was a lot of content. If you have any extra questions, I'm happy to stay on and have a discussion and chat about things.
So who benefits from these data centers? It seems that there's a lot of public people who are against them, but there's obviously a group of people in power who are for them. And so I'm wondering who benefits and why are some people for them?
That's a great question. And thank you for the soft, underhanded pitch to me of what's important when you think about any decision. Who benefits and who is harmed? Those are two questions we ask for everything. Who benefits? Well, we're benefiting now. If we didn't have data centers, we couldn't do this. So in some regards, we are. That's helpful. The locales, I think maybe you've read articles about Loudoun County. They've got an incredible tax increase they've had a tax reduction in their real estate taxes, and they've had a tax increase from the data centers paying taxes. Even though they're exempt on a lot of other taxes, they are giving a lot of revenue to the locale. So they have a lot more benefits in Loudoun. But if you've driven around Loudoun, you'll have to ask yourself, is that worth it? You know, or can we do it better? Can we get both? Right? I think we always try to think about, can we get both? Especially since we all need data centers in our lives. And then, you know, there's a lot of speculation about, I wasn't able to attend, I was on vacation, but our conservation director, Lydia Lawrence, and our Maryland conservation advocate, Angie McCarthy, they just attended a data center conference last week, and I just got the debrief today. They said there is speculation about where we're going. They're buying up properties and building data centers, getting approvals as fast as possible because they know that artificial intelligence is growing at a rate so quickly that we need all the computing power we can, and we're going to need more in the future. Right now, there are data centers in Fairfax County that are built and waiting to go online because there is not power to power them. That's the level of speculation that we have on data centers, and it's not stopping, right? The building, it's not stopping. Prince William County, if you're familiar with how they rezone 2,000 acres for data centers, they're building there. We don't have that kind of acreage, but you know, certainly we have a lot more density, so we'll be having a lot more you know, residential or school conflicts, you know, of where these will go. So hope that gives you a little bit of insight of.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll drop the link to our blog post in the chat box. You can use that. You can just email Supervisor Bierman directly. You don't need to send a letter through that blog post, but it has a lot of good information in it. And if you want to sign up to speak tomorrow, if you've never done that, email me offline and I'll give you, we have a little, it might even be on the blog post, I can't remember now. We have a little handout of how do you get involved. We try to make it as easy as possible with pictures, processes. Feel free to hit me up and I'll do my best. Jerry, go ahead.
I would note that the Fairfax County had their staff prepare a report on the impacts and possibilities, on data centers that should be available, through the county website someplace. I have not read it. I'm not recommending it. But for those of us who want to learn more before we go spouting off about what we want, that would be a good resource.
Yeah, we've done that analysis and they tried to make it as condensed into those talking points as possible. That's our perspectives. Obviously, you might have other perspectives too. But yeah,
Did you find that report truthful and helpful?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think the report was good. We think it was a little bit incomplete. The Sierra Club did a much deeper dive than we did. But it talked about a lot of really good things. The zoning ordinance is limited in what it can do. But we wish it could, we want it to do more. We want it to do the max that it can. And a special exception will allow it to do the max that it can.
Renee, Tim Hackman, thank you so much for an informative evening as usual. And thank you also, the Nature Forward, you personally, Lydia, the coalition, and everybody who's been helping the Park Authority also in terms of our budget efforts. Just in terms of logistics for the Wednesday night budget hearing, which Renee was kind enough to mention. Typically, as she had mentioned before, in terms of testifying before the state House committees, in our situation, we usually allow 3 minutes for individuals and 5 minutes if one is representing a group or an association. So just that little piece of further information. The other thing is, last year, the county executive had asked for proposed 7% cuts to the, and these cuts address just the taxpayer supported funds that the county provides us, which in the Park Authority's case is about $36 million proposed for FY26. So we would, but last year, none of those 7% non-recommended cuts that we put forward, not recommended by our board, were adopted by the county executive. This year, of course, the ask is 10%. Last year, personnel reductions were not on the table. This year they are. So some of the reductions that, again, that we will not be endorsing, but that we have to put forward, totaling $3.6 million out of our $36 million of general funds. Unfortunately, will potentially include active staff positions, not just vacant staff positions. For example, if they took everything, we would probably close a nature center and close a historic site, which would mean some merit and seasonal positions as well. So again, Renee, thank you for highlighting that. We'll talk more about that at our board meeting Wednesday night, and wonderful session. Thank you.
I heard a rumor that maybe a loss of an ecologist too, of which we only need more. We do not need to lose
yes, and including I think currently vacant, I'm a coordinator, that specific position, and we certainly need more invasive plant activity and management too.
Wow. I think going forward, so we'll send out the links as well to more information, as well as information about where you can provide comments if you feel like you're ready to. And then I think a lot of what you've discussed or shared with us, Renee, will be takeaways for us to talk about in our legislative committee, special committee within GFCA, as we think about our strategy for next year. So I really appreciate you spending your time and sharing your insights and your knowledge in this space.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone here, because it takes all of us. It takes everyone. Nature Forward cannot do it without constituents. And so that's the most important message for you all to tell your neighbors. Just a quick email can be so impactful. When you get 5 emails as a supervisor, that means one thing. When you get 500, that means a whole nother thing. So I think that message is great for all of us to take out. It's really that chain letter kind of mentality, right? Get 5 people to do it, get 5 people to do that down the line. So thanks for everybody in this room here learning, because it's a process for sure.
Appreciate it. Before we close today, I wanted to leave on a high note. Winnie has been working with Bierman's office on putting together a Drainsville tree celebration. So Winnie, if you could share a little bit, and Renee, if you want to drop, or if you want to hear what
I want to hear this. I'm really excited
yeah,
about it.
what's going on?
Well, before I get into that, Renee, first of all, fabulous. I learned so much tonight. I really appreciate it a lot. And I need to learn a lot more. But anyway, okay, we have a few announcements. The first one, which is what we've sent out to you a few times, is to do the zero waste survey. It's open through the end of this month, September 30th, and really appreciate it. There's some really amazing ideas that are being tossed around there, and it's very, very comprehensive. And this is being done through the county's solid waste management department. So I hope you all do that. Secondly, we will have our but our organization yearly budget meeting, and that will be on Tuesday, September 24th at 7 p.m. at the library. I hope you can mark your calendar for that. That's when we figure out our budget for the year and have you all, join in and approve it. That's really important. We need a quorum in order to get that budget approved. And then on to the really good stuff. Yes, Lisa and I had started talking with Supervisor Bierman last January, right after he started. And we were talking about trees because we were all in the General Assembly meetings and what was going on with trees. And he loves trees. And she brought up, oh, let's do a tree symposium. And so here we are 9 months later, and it's going to happen. We're part of the effort, the steering committee, to put it on. It'll be October 20th. It's a Sunday at Lewinsville Park. And it's all about trees. The name of it is Caring for Our Canopy. We'll have children's events. We'll have plant clinics that are focused on trees. We'll have some arborists. We'll have different organizations that provide grants, opportunities for grants for HOAs to do in their communities. You like that one, don't you, Renee? And a lot of other things. We're in the formative stage right now. We have at least 60 different organizations that want to participate. And we're going to have tents out there. And it'll only run for 3 hours, but this is our first effort to try to initiate something like this for every year, because we know how important trees are to our communities, our life, our health, our wildlife, everything. So I hope you'll consider joining that event.
Winnie, quick question. What is the 3-hour window on that day?
The third, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock at Lewinsville Park on October 20th. A lot more information will be coming out. We've only had our second meeting, but we've had a tremendous outpouring from local organizations that want to get involved in this. And maybe we can make it a yearly event and expand it. Oh, we're also going to have, stuff on invasive plant management, which is pretty important because they tend to strangle the trees. So a lot of stuff going on with that. So keep that on your calendar. And also, sooner than that, make sure you try to come to our September 24th organization meeting on the budget. So those are my 3 announcements today. And coming down the road, I will have another announcement on our holiday ornament, but it's a little early for that. So that's it.
And one last thing, our speaker for October is Tim. We'll talk about the Park Authority Board and get more behind the scenes of what happens and what he could use our help with.
Right. And
And
also the budget issues that Renee was teeing up for us. So thank you for that too.
And then we'll move right into Riverbend Park and what they're doing over there.
Exactly.
So we're all interconnecting here. It's kind of exciting. So thank you, Renee, for your time today.
Yes, thank you. It was very interesting.
Great. All right, everyone. Thank you all. And I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you. Appreciate
Good night.
it.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.